Today on the Take On Board podcast, I'm speaking with Daralyse Lyons about non-executive roles, about executive director roles, and we might even hear the story of why she resigned from a role when she excelled because of the board. Before we start the podcast today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record. For me, I am on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I also pay my respects to any First Nations people who may be listening today. I acknowledge their continuing connection to land, waters, skies, culture, and country. I support Voice, Treaty and Truth for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia, and I encourage others in the Take On Board community to do the same. Now, let me tell you about Daralyse. Daralyse is on the board of Venice Island Performing Arts Centre, and she's previously been on, lots of boards. She's a journalist, an author. She's got prior experience in business development and financial management. She's written more than 24 books, a handful of short stories, countless articles. She's a member of the National Association of Black Journalists and the former vice president of Philadelphia's chapter of NLGJA. That's hard to say. She graduated summa cum laude from New York University with a double major in English and religious studies and a minor in history. In 2023, she received a Pennsylvania City and State Impact Award, acknowledged as one of the 75 most impactful individuals in the entire state of Pennsylvania. And more recently, she became a Who's Who honoree. She currently works for Bucks County Beacon as their Chief Revenue Officer. Oh, so many stories in here already. Welcome to the Take On Board podcast, Daralyse.
Oh, hi, Helia. It's so wonderful to be with you and to be with your viewers and your listeners. I love that you did the land acknowledgement at the beginning. I'm currently occupying unceded Lenni Lenape territory in Philadelphia in the U.S. So really glad to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you. It is awesome to have you here. And the acknowledgement of country is a custom that has been on these lands for millennia. So it is more commonly happening at the start of meetings and conversations as it has for, as I say, millennia with First Nations people. So, yeah, it's great to hear the lands that you are on as well. So, Daralyse, before we dig into your story, which I am very much looking forward to, but before we dig there, I would like to dig a little bit deeper about you. Can you tell me a story? Can you tell me a story about young Daralyse that tells us a little about how you got to where you are today?
Well, the first one that comes to mind, I was 10 years old. And for anyone listening, they can't see, I have like this big, boofy hair. It looks like a lion's mane. And, my last name is Lyons. And I remember I was 10 years old and I wanted to straighten my hair. And I asked my mom if I could straighten my hair. And she said, no. And I said, well, can you please enumerate your objections? I was 10 years old, Helia, and I used words like enumerate. And she's like, well, it's expensive. They use lye relaxer, which damages your hair, and your hair doesn't go back to its original texture or something. And I said, are those all of your objections? And she was like, yes. And so I'm 42. And so at that time we had phone books. We didn't just like look everything up on the internet. And so I got the phone book, the family phone book, and I leafed through and I called, I think like 4 or 5 different hair salons. And I found a salon that had no lye relaxer, that was relatively affordable, that said, promise that my hair would go back to its original texture. And I came to my mom and said, well, I found a solution and I made myself an appointment, and that I think encapsulates the beauty and the curse and the joy of being me. Like, I always look for solutions to problems. I'm a kind of very highly pragmatic, sometimes too like annoyingly kind of like precocious. But yes, that is very much a story that I think about as emblematic of who I've become later in life.
Oh my goodness. And I'm imagining, I love how you say it's the beauty, joy and curse of being you. But I imagine, dare I say it, the beauty, joy and curse of for your mother as well. Having to
Oh my gosh, I know. I know. She raised me to be a little lawyer. Like, I was either going to be, go into, I don't know, business, or I actually sort of have a creative background. But yeah, I don't know. I was just always like, oh, let me just think about all of the ways to solve this problem and then I'll solve it. And if I can't solve the problem, or then that means that it's not a problem to be solved, or I just have to deal with it or accept it. But I definitely oh, my brain is, it's a blessing and a curse, I
Oh my
guess.
God. That is brilliant. Oh, I think I probably need to get your mother on the podcast as well and hear some of the other stories.
Oh my goodness. Well, she actually does sit on a board or 2 herself, so,
Maybe I will.
maybe you will. Maybe you shall. Yeah, right.
Oh, I love that story. Thank you. It's so good to hear a little bit about the full person, even if it is, dare I say it, slightly precocious child. So, did you get your hair done? Did you go to did she allow it?
I did. I got it straightened, and, it was the first time I ever felt my hair, like, blowing in the breeze. I didn't know hair did that. I thought, like, "Oh, it's just like a stabilized Brillo pad or something was my typical hair." So, yeah, it was, but I think, like, for me, I just being encouraged to be innovative was always something that was really important to me. And it did get me into trouble at some points earlier in my life, but it's been one of my biggest professional assets, I would say, too. Like, really being able to look at all of the dimensions of an issue and being able to kind of create a culture of problem solving. So I love that about myself, even though when I was a kid and everyone else was making paper mache horses and I decided to make a paper mache unicorn, like, and failed art, it wasn't always easier when I was younger, but it's gotten a lot better as I've gotten older.
God, I love it. Love, love, love. Oh, I'm also now imagining your, photo albums from your childhood of, Daralyse with your hair as is, as the lion. I love that your surname is Lion and you look like a lion. And then Daralyse with, her straightened, blowing in the wind hair. And then your unicorn. And oh, it just sounds like it's full of sparkles and joy. I love it.
Yes, sparkles and joy. That is absolutely accurate.
All right. Well, look, thank you for sharing some of that. I love it. And I could probably stay talking about sparkles and joy for the whole time. However, I'm guessing some of the other stories are not quite so sparkles and joy. So, you've got loads of experience as I say, as a non-executive director, as an executive director. You've got some interesting experiences, shall we say, as an executive director. Where should we start your story?
Sure. Well, I mean, this is the Take on Board podcast, right? And so you're speaking about board experiences, and I've had some wonderful experiences on boards. I've actually been sitting on the board of the Venice Island Performing Arts Center since pre-COVID. So it's maybe been 2017, 2018, or something that I started working with them, and that has been delightful and just such a enriching experience. I've learned a lot. I like to think I've contributed a lot to the organization, and so that's been really meaningful, doing arts and culture work for them. And then I've had some not so great experiences on boards, which I think is what you're alluding to. I recently left a job, in fact, because I disagreed very strongly with the direction that the board was wanting to take for the organization. I felt like it was not in the best interest of the organization. The staff members felt like it was not in the best interest of the organization. My research said it was not in the best interest of the organization. Even the board acknowledged that it probably wasn't in the best interest of the organization, but it was a 67-year legacy organization, and they just were not willing or able to make fiscally responsible sort of employment responsible decisions. And so I left, and they didn't think I was going to leave, but I did. And I got 4 job offers at the time when I transitioned out of the organization, and I chose the one without a board, actually. Like, that was a huge deciding factor because even though I have had many amazing and functional boards that I have loved being part of or working for organizations, I just thought, you know what, I can't, like, I sort of can't leave one dysfunctional organization for another organization that's not functional, and I didn't know, and so I wanted to make sure that I was, choosing wisely. So I chose an organization where I'm a phenomenal boss. We don't have board members, we don't have advisory committees. I report to one person reports to me, and it's like, I mean, it just feels like such a breath of fresh air.
Okay. Well, look, I'm going to dig into that a little bit in as much detail as you're willing to share. So you were the executive director of this organization. So you're on the board and managed by the board, which is already slightly tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I was a non-voting member. So the executive director did not at this particular organization, and I know every organization can be different. So I was in all of the meetings, up until I started to have some friction with the board. I was in every executive session, but then they started to have like external deliberations, and I was not privy to a lot of what was going on behind the scenes, and that's hard. I mean, I think to have people in the room who are making decisions that are not really intimately connected with the nature of an organization, with the workflow, with the personnel issues, um, isn't great. And I want to say that one of the things that was a little bit disheartening for me is that I was sort of celebrated by this same board as making wonderful decisions for the organization and getting us from the red into the black, and just really spearheading some financial initiatives, spearheading some hiring initiatives. Like, I applied for 501(c)(3) status, and I filled out all the paperwork with one of the other board members, and like I
So
mean,
you're
I
going to
just
need
like
to
was really.
explain to the Australian listeners and viewers 501c status. What is that?
Oh, okay, so 501(c)(3) is a tax designation in the United States for nonprofit
Oh, okay.
organizations.
So for
So it's a
Australian folk,
lot
it's
of.
probably like what we call DGR, deductible gift recipient. So you get tax deductibility for
Yes,
donations. Yes.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, yeah,
Great.
yeah, and but the paperwork process, I don't know what
Oh,
it's like
yeah.
in Australia, but
Oh,
it's
yeah.
very arduous. And so, did that, made some other, like, really great inroads in terms of development. So it was actually kind of disheartening to have a board that had seen me in collaboration with the other staff make like really wonderful decision after wonderful decision after wonderful decision, and be celebrated for our work and our efforts, and the increase in revenue and the increase in productivity and the technology wins, and then have the same board kind of make a unilateral decision to go against a recommendation that was highly researched and I think in the best interest of the organization. So it was challenging, but, I started off by saying that I like to find innovative ways to solve problems. And so I came to them with a problem and a solution, and they weren't willing or able to to address it. And I'm just wasn't willing or able to stay in an organization when I felt like I was being asked to make decisions or to stand behind decisions that were not in the best interest of the organization. So,
Which I think, I mean, I do, strangely enough, I talk to a lot of board directors. And if you can't stand behind the decision of the board, you need to have, I think, that cabinet solidarity, basically. And if you can't stand behind it, then you do need to leave. But it's interesting for you as the executive director. So you're obviously, the lead in the organization. So uh, I'm wondering what would you like, so there's this particular decision to be made, and you and the organization are thinking one way, the board is thinking a different way, and then the board says, no, this is what's happening. How might it have played out differently, perhaps? What could the story have been if it played out differently and more constructively?
So I think it's interesting because depending on the nature of the decision, I mean, if it was something like, I wanted to paint the walls green and the board wanted to paint the walls yellow, or, like something, a small procedural thing or a dotting of I's or a crossing of T's, I think it would have been fine. And I don't mean to lump the board together. I mean, this particular board was a board of 9 members, and it was really two or three, I would say a small but very vocal majority. And that often happens in boards where a lot of board members sort of take a back seat and feel like, oh, well, this isn't our industry, or we're not really that familiar with this. So we'll just kind of trust the board members that we empower to make decisions, to make those decisions. But so I would say there were two or three members of the board who had a difference in, and it wasn't an opinion, it was like a well-researched employment issue, that the board was doing something that I felt put the organization at risk of being sued potentially, put staff members at risk of, being in an environment that was not safe or appropriate for them. And so uh, I mean, I researched things extensively. I documented. I, came to the board over and over again. I actually got their approval to go with my recommendations, and then they rescinded their approval. So it was a very kind of messy, sticky situation, that I felt would put me at risk personally and professionally if I were to stay with the organization or condone, uh, the behavior. But if it had been something small, I mean, I had many times when the board had disagreed with me about something and we just agreed to disagree, or I found a workaround that met whatever their needs were or whatever. So I think, sometimes I don't think that it's bad for boards to disagree with their executives. I do think that at the end of the day, the organization has to be the prime character in the story, and everyone should try to make decisions that are in the best long-term interests of the organization.
It's interesting. I'm thinking back to the story you told about your hair, actually. And if you'd known, well, it needs to be without these chemicals and it needs to not do this, then you know what the bounds are and you can work out a solution to the problem that meets everybody's requirements as well.
Right. Yeah, 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 yeah. And sometimes the metrics change or the goalposts move, and that's always a challenge, I think, for me. But the other piece is like really my the boards that I've been a part of that have functioned the most effectively have really operated with a servant leadership mentality where the board feels like, okay, our job is to support and empower the staff and to see, things that maybe they can't see, to take a broader picture view. Even sometimes like I sat on the board of Venice Island, and the executive director there is wonderful, and she's also very overworked. And so like part of sometimes we'll sit in board meetings and come up with all of these different to-dos, and I've been the voice in the room that has said, you know what, there are too many things here to do, so let's prioritize them, because it's really only realistic for our executive director to get two of these things done between now and our next board meeting. So let's not give her a list of, 30 things to do. And so I think boards are kind of supposed to have their executives backs. They're supposed to have the organization's backs. They're supposed to kind of be mindful of their fiduciary responsibilities. And so the most functional boards that I've been part of have all done that. And that's not always the case. Sometimes there's politicking. Sometimes there's, you know, eh, different objectives that board members have. Sometimes there's a lack of awareness about the industry or different trends. So, and the board that I I've reported to a board of 9 that reported to a board of 23. So uh there were some structural issues within the organization that made it like we had an owner organization and an owner board, and then the board that I reported to. And so there was a bit of triangulation, and one board would say one thing, and then the other board would say a different thing, and the boards didn't get along. So it was like um, it was a situation that for me, I felt like, oh, the structure here is problematic. Can't really accomplish what's in the best interest of the organization. And so be here if I'm not going to be effective.
So I'm wondering in this what the role of the chair of the board was, because often the chair is the link between, the executive director or the CEO or whatever, the senior management basically, and the board. Are you able to share any of that part of the story?
This particular chair was very community minded, very civically engaged. I think real big heart for the community and the organization. But took a very passive role and wasn't I don't really know where things broke down. I feel like there was a lot that came out of our conversations where I thought, okay, she's going to do this and I'm going to do that. And then I did the things I thought I was going to do, and the parts fell apart. So I don't know. I certainly don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but it was, I think, her first time being in a leadership role on a board, and she was sort of newish to that particular board. And so I think because of age, perhaps, like there were other members of the board and the board above our board that maybe didn't give a chair with who was 30 like the same level of respect and gravitas that perhaps if this board president had been older or more seasoned they would have done. And I think maybe because she was new to the role. She kind of took a back seat and wanted to just see how things would play out. So I think there was maybe a certain amount of passivity that, at least on the surface, that I think lacked efficacy. But it's hard to know because again, like there were a lot of conversations that I wasn't privy to. I just knew that, we had certain agreements and then the board didn't fulfill them, and I felt like it was putting the organization at risk.
Okay. So you ended up leaving that organization, and heard a little bit about how that impacted for you as an employee. It's like, oh, I'm not going to work for a board again. I'm wondering how it's impact because you're still on boards, but you're still on the board. How has this impacted, or what have you learned from this for your own board practice?
This is something that I think I was doing before, but I would highly encourage anyone who's on a board or interested in joining a board or whatever to really get to know the staff. Like when I left my previous organization, there were tears. I mean, 12 out of the 15 employees, I think, wrote letters to the board telling them that, this is a tragedy and we don't understand your decision making. Actually, the part of the story I didn't tell was that the board dissolved itself after I left. The board, because they acknowledged, several of them, that they'd made the wrong decision, and so they dissolved themselves. So it was a real messy situation. But one of the things that happened after I gave my notice was the board went in and they interviewed the staff, which I'd been encouraging them to do all along. And they went in and they spoke to the staff, and they said 2 days later they dissolved themselves. Some of the board members who were part of that process were like, "Oh gosh, you were right, but now it's too late." And so I think what I would say to anyone who's a member of a board is to like really get to know the staff, like, and feel like a safe place for staff members to bring concerns. And and if an executive makes a recommendation, before dismissing it, I think really thinking about like, well, how does the staff feel about this? And how is this going to impact the people who are actually affected by this? And like really to believe staff members and to empower them, because by and large, I think, well, people don't leave organizations because the pay is not what they want it to be, or because, of convenience or whatever, like, but they leave because of culture, and they leave because of wanting to feel like their ideas are heard and like they have a voice and a vote. And so I know, a lot of the members of my previous organization are looking or leaving, or because they just didn't they felt kind of betrayed by the board. And so I think that's something that I think about, like if I am involved in an organization in any capacity, whether I'm a staff member, whether I'm in a leadership role, whether I'm a board member, whether I'm volunteering, like I always want to think about how can I add value to this organization? How can I understand the people here? How can I see what's missing and fill in those, gaps? And I think different boards have different needs. Like some boards are working boards, some boards are giving boards, some boards, have meet 4 times a year, some meet once a month, some have committees and subcommittees and all of that. And so I think really learning the culture, recognizing what do I have to add to this culture, and how can I really be part of creating an experience where everyone wants to go to work every day and feels like their work is making a difference and feels like the board has their back. And so and feels like the executives have their back, and because sometimes executives are not doing what's in the best interest of the staff. And then you want to, as a board member, have relationships with staff members where they can come to you and they can tell you things, and it's you're like, you feel like you have open channels of communication. So I think that's something that I really strive to do, is to create relationships with people at all levels of the organization.
Well, it's interesting. Can I test that a little bit then? Because sometimes there is a fine line, I think, for board members getting to know staff. Um, the boards are meant to be on the balcony and looking strategically for the organization, and sometimes knowing the staff gets them into the weeds. How do you think that line can be well balanced?
Yeah, so I'm not talking about cultivating friendships. I'm talking about cultivating like professional connections and networks of accountability and trust. So like for me, going in and speaking to the staff and just saying like, hey, I'd love to know what's working well here, what's not, how I can sort of personally empower you, like, what are the processes in place that are working effectively? Like, do you ever feel unheard? Those kinds of things I think are completely reasonable. Like I'm not going to vacation with staff members or vacation with board members if I'm a member of staff. I'm not going to like, I'll go to a business lunch and have a conversation with them, but I'm not like going out to drinks and hanging out on the weekends. So, yeah.
Oh, Daralyse, so much in here that I think board directors can take about their own practice. What are the key things you want people to take away from the conversation that we've had today?
Sure. So I think if someone is reporting to a board or interacting with a board, what I would hope they could do or encourage them to do is to like really think about themselves as kind of being peers, like I don't think there should be like this hierarchical structure of like, oh, I just have to sit down and take whatever the board says, or that like I think really just like looking at the boards are made up of people and people make mistakes and people are wonderful and people are all sorts of things. And so just really if you're someone who is a staff member, an executive director, like thinking about, okay, is this board reflective of the organization's values? Are they doing the right things? Can I voice my concerns? And I think, like, for me, always being willing to take a stand for one's personal and professional integrity is super important. So, yeah, I have no regrets about walking away from my previous job. I would have had regrets if I didn't speak up or stand up, but that's not my personality. So, yeah, and then I think for board members, like, is to really listen, like to deeply listen and to ask why. Like if an executive is coming to you a number of times with a similar concern or whatever, like to really think about, okay, like how serious is this and how then do I value this person and do I think this person values the organization? And to get curious, like there's a saying to get curious instead of furious or whatever. And I think about that a lot. Like my background is in journalism. And so I always want to ask questions. I want to learn more. And I don't want to assume that I have all the answers. I mean, I told you about that story when I was a kid, but like, I needed to investigate, right? Like, I needed to investigate. And so I think for boards to take that responsibility seriously, and also, there's I mean, I talked about kind of a dysfunctional board, but there's a lot of dysfunctional like executive directors and high level executives and stuff in organizations. And that's one of the reasons I think it is important for boards to get to know the staff beyond just the executive director, because I can't even tell you how many times, hell yeah, like I've had conversations with people who have been like, "Oh yeah, well the executive director was doing this, this, and this, and the board never knew about it because the staff didn't go to the board or the board didn't go to the staff." And so I think just like really creating open channels of communication and fostering transparency is super super important. It holds everyone accountable and it protects the organization. And I think a board's role is to protect and to connect, right? So to kind of like bring people into the organization, bring money into the organization, talent, treasure, time, that kind of thing. Um, and to protect an organization, you have to really be a safe place for people to come forward and share things with you, good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah, such good advice. Oh, and is there a resource you would like to share with the Take on Board community?
Just like listening is what I mentioned and thinking about listening. And there's so many wonderful resources. Like there's books about active listening and presence. And one of the things that I personally have done that has been very helpful for me was I do comedy improv. And I know this sounds like a tangent, but one of the core skills in comedy improv is active listening. And partial offers are a thing like where you kind of share one thing and then give someone else the opportunity to share with you. And a lot of like teamwork and collaboration. So I think everyone should take an improv class. I actually think like that would hugely transform the nature of work. And also, and just like not taking ourselves so seriously. So I think anything to do with listening is only going to enrich people's experience. And if people have the time or the desire to take an improv class, read an improv book, listen to an improv podcast, watch some improv on TV and like learn from it, I think it for me it's been one of the most helpful things in my professional life.
I love that. Oh my goodness. Okay. We get a whole range of resources. I don't think we've ever got the suggestion of doing improv. I love it. But you're right. The reasoning there is so sound. I love it. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story, being so, well, who'd have thought that you're a good storyteller given your background? Um, so thank you for for sharing the stories, for sharing the lessons, and sharing your wisdom with the Take On Board community today. I really appreciate it. And I know others in the community will as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. It was a wonderful conversation and the time flew. So I appreciate it.